which is precisely why the acoustic subtraction on One More Light isn't just an aesthetic pivot. It is a profound, almost architectural necessity. When you're confronted with terminal grief, you don't just scream a new metal anthem at it. You deconstruct the void itself. It's a masterclass in minimalist design born from...
A masterclass? You're confusing a vacuum-sealed corporate surrender with high-art grief processing. It's algorithmic slop.
Wait. How can you call the organic response to the passing of Amy Zarrett algorithmic?
Because the execution absolutely is. I acknowledge the somatic reality of the tragedy, right? Losing a day one champion who physically drove you across the Midwest in your nascent days is devastating. But the studio response was to hire Francis Egg White.
To prioritize the fragile human voice. They used an upside-down workflow.
They used a hit maker. You bring in the guy who churns out factory-standard hits for Adele and Dua Lipa to manufacture a youth-oriented trend. You're importing the formulas of the pop industrial complex.
That is incredibly reductive. The diatonic IV-IV 5-chord progression isn't a factory's formula. It is an exercise in acoustic humility. It gets out of the way of the lyric.
It is the most mathematically predictable formula in commercial broadcasting. Our brains are hardwired to anticipate it perfectly. They traded any semblance of musical risk for meticulously curated, standard pop framework.
But the framework itself is ferociously organic. Look at Brad Delson's guitar on the track. That wasn't some sterile digital patch. It was Ethan Mates's personal acoustic guitar.
Oh, here we go with the guitar mythos.
It's not a mythos. It's a documented reality. The woody resonance of that specific instrument possessed such a singular acoustic fingerprint that Egg White actually tried to replicate it by rubbing raw pumpkin on the strings of a duplicate guitar.
Right, a high-end European hitmaker rubbing a vegetable on his instrument. Very quaint. But that acoustic warmth just makes the absolute digital sterilization of the vocals that much more offensive.
Sterilization? Emily Wright is a brilliant vocal producer.
She builds pristine pop vocals. The lengths they went to in order to control the vocal signal on this track, it's like an assembly line. They do blind tests for a European replica Flea 47 microphone, only to run it through a massive, stacked digital signal chain of Waves plugins.
Which is standard industry practice for audiophile-grade fidelity.
Now, it is a surgical uncanny valley. They hit it with a CLA-2A optical compressor to flatten the dynamic range into this, lifeless plateau. Then a CLA-76 to instantly guillotine any sharp transient peaks.
Well, yes, it smooths out the harsh consonants, but
it flattens the human breath. If you're singing about raw, messy mortality, using Pro Tools and a C4 multiband compressor to surgically neuter specific resonant frequencies is counterintuitive. It creates a factory-sealed product devoid of any actual human imperfection.
I completely disagree. That pristine clarity is a deliberate textual contrast. The H-Delay plugin isn't just artificial reverb. It creates a vast, empty sonic space. It's an architectural mirroring of the literal void left by losing someone.
That is quite the flowery excuse for an artificial synthetic canyon.
It's not an excuse. By restricting the melody's vocal range to a very narrow band, essentially hovering between E-flat 4 and E-flat 5, the singer relies entirely on microexpressions. The plug-in chain ensures the listener hears every subtle crack in the voice.
Hovering between E-flat 4 and E-flat 5 at a moderate 84 to 85 beats per minute isn't an artistic choice about intimacy. That is the exact mathematical blueprint for top 40 radio. It is a desperate grasp at virality.
That's exactly the sort of gatekeeping nostalgia trap that Consequence of Sound fell into when they gave it a D+.
Because it sounded like committee-designed prepackaged EDM you'd hear at a massive festival. It was a cynical commercial pivot.
It wasn't a pivot at all. We have empirical data proving it wasn't a cynical cash grab.
Oh, please, illuminate me with your data science.
I will. Computational musicologists used principal component analysis, extracting features using Mel frequency cepstral coefficients, right? And they ran a k-means clustering algorithm on the band's entire catalog.
So you're using machine learning to defend an emotional track? Ironic.
The algorithm placed One More Light into Cluster 3, Melodious and Mellow, alongside tracks dating back a full decade to Minutes to Midnight in 2007. It proves this was the teleological culmination of a 10-year sonic evolution, not a sudden sellout.
All that proves is that they've been slowly homogenizing their sound for a decade. A gradual slide into sterile predictability doesn't validate the song, it just means the factory took 10 years to build.
That is incredibly cynical.
It's the reality of the commodity. If this minimalist 84 BPM acoustic intimacy was so vital, why did they immediately gut it for the One More Light World Tour?
The live environment naturally requires a different spatial translation.
They cranked it up to 104.8 BPM to manufacture arena-level adrenaline. They abandoned the restraint. And then, the Steve Aoki Chester Forever remix injects synthetic, club-ready percussion and massive EDM drops.
Remixes are gestures of goodwill. They adapt the thesis.
They process a meditation on mortality into a high-energy nightclub banger. It dilutes the somber message entirely to chase streaming algorithms.
I strongly push back on that. The message survived perfectly, and the visual media proves it. Nicola Drilling's fan-sourced lyric video was a grassroots mobilization, completely organic.
Fan engagement is just free marketing labor.
It is authentic human connection. And the official music video, directed by Joe Hahn, utilized absolutely zero CGI. It was built entirely from 2 decades of intimate archival footage. You cannot fake the cinematic purity of those backstage moments.
You're right, the archival footage is moving. But that just proves my point. The visuals do the heavy emotional lifting because the audio track is dead. They had to weaponize 20 years of shared nostalgia to reanimate a soulless, factory-sealed corpse.
Calling a platinum and gold certified track that resonated globally a corpse simply ignores the empathy it fostered.
It resonated globally because it was a highly optimized, predatory product engineered for mass consumption. They traded any remaining shred of artistic friction for algorithmic efficiency, leaving behind nothing but background noise for a generation that doesn't know any better.